Recognizing the member for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to rise in the House today and respond to the speech from the throne meant to lay out the goals and priorities of this government as we move through the spring legislative session and into the future. I'd like to thank the Lieutenant Governor for her role in our Parliament and wish Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth condolences on the loss of her husband, Prince Philip. I am honored to represent the beautiful riding of West Vancouver, which is located on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This riding stretches across the District of West Vancouver, the District of North Vancouver, and a small slice of the City of North Vancouver. Unlike many of the members in this House, I can drive across my entire riding in 15 minutes, which I know makes many of you jealous. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my constituency assistant, Tracy Dobell, whose experience and enthusiasm has made my transition into being a new MLA all that much easier. And to our new constituency assistant, Paula Slavicki, who is also becoming invaluable. Both Paula and Tracy have deep roots in the community that we're in, and they've been extraordinary in helping me understand the issues of our constituents and in helping guide those constituents and find solutions to the challenges that they're facing in these uncertain times. And it goes without saying, but I will say it, that my legislative assistant, Alicia Butler, has been invaluable in helping me navigate life here in the legislature. And without her and Marissa Olson, I'd be lost wandering the halls. I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation to Ralph Sultan, who stood here in this room and represented the people of West Vancouver, Capilano, for many years. He did so in a respectful, intelligent manner, respected on both sides of this House, and I am sure he continues to tune in to this channel. I have had the great fortune of meeting a number of groups in my community since becoming the MLA: Stream Keepers, For Our Youth, the West Vancouver Police Department Board, Superintendent of the RCMP Detachment for the District of North Vancouver, Kawasa Housing, Firefighters Local 1525, and many more. And finally, my thanks and appreciation to my family, including my 94-year-old mother, who has now discovered what's actually on Legislature TV and tunes in regularly if there is even the slightest chance of catching a glimpse of her daughter on television, which is then followed with an email critique of my outfit. So turning to the speech from the throne. These are extraordinary times in British Columbia, and we are in crises. And we have multiple and overlapping crises: health, mental health and addictions, and an economic crisis that has not been seen for generations. These have all been exacerbated by an unnecessary snap election. But now it is time for a bold and innovative approach to move us forward. What I heard in this throne speech were more of the same platitudes and promises that we've been hearing for the last 4 years, Mr. Speaker. Where's the vision? Where is the excitement about what the potential of this province and British Columbians can do? And where are the clear commitments and action plan that's going to come in this next budget? I've heard that we are in the same storm, but we are in different boats. Regardless of the boat we are in, we need a lighthouse. British Columbia has an opportunity to leverage the amazing talent and resources that it has. But we need leadership from this government that can paint a picture of what the future looks like and to guide us there. We need an articulated strategy. I didn't hear that in the speech from the throne. British Columbians need to feel safe, and they can only do that if they know there's a plan. Now, I may be the only person that stands up and responds to the speech without focusing on COVID, because it's bigger than that. We're at a point where we need to look down the road. We need to look at what's going to happen next year and the year after that. And it all starts with moving past the excuses of COVID, the challenges of COVID, and how are we going to build for our future. The throne speech promised nothing new. It was support for mental health, childcare, affordable housing, but these are not new, and clearly these are issues. These are unfulfilled promises that we've heard from this government for the last 4 years. And there was no mention for supports for people and businesses impacted right now by this relentless third wave, which will wreak havoc for months to come. This is a budget, government says, that will make British Columbia stronger for everyone. If this is the case, why won't it meet the cries of those 17,000 social services workers who are non-unionized, who are asking for fair wages? And why do new childcare policies financially cripple providers that are trying to add daycare spaces in British Columbia? These daycare spaces, which are exactly what we need to help women and families participate in our economy again. The throne speech mentions daycare. Government says it will help even more families get access to affordable, high-quality daycare, and it will increase the number of available $10 a day daycare spaces. But this is the same thing that this government has been saying for the past 3 years. And this government is far from transparent in this initiative, requiring those daycare child providers participating in $10 a day daycare to sign non-disclosure statements so they can't talk about the program. Now, this government also promised to have 24,000 spaces, daycare spaces, by this point in their mandate. By last summer, there were only 3,490 new spaces created by this government. And I think we have to think about the words that we use when we are talking about those spaces. I'm using the word new spaces. I am not using the word licensed spaces. The number of 20,000, which is claimed by this government, are largely not new spaces. They're a reclassification of existing spaces from being a registered daycare to being a licensed daycare. Therefore, they have created licensed daycare spaces. But moving daycares from registered to licensed, while being a really good thing and improving quality and supporting daycares, it's not the same thing as actually creating those spaces because they already existed. In comparison, the BC Liberals created between 2005 and 2017 39,959 new spaces. That's an average of 3,300, just over 3,300 spaces per year. At the end of this past March, government signed an additional one-year extension agreement with the providers, these 52 pilot sites, piloting the $10 a day daycare. Now, I have to ask, why are we still piloting something after 3 years with the same number of pilot sites that we started with? And why is there another one-year extension without our seeing a plan for whether this is working and it's going to move forward. $10 a day daycare was a fundamental and central promise from the NDP, and one that families believed in. Now, I am hoping that the reference to $10 a day daycare spaces means real dollars will be dedicated in the budget to make this a reality, and not merely a stopgap waiting for the federal government to step in. Childcare in the province of British Columbia is this government's responsibility. I'm also hoping that government is looking very closely at the utilization of the $10 a day daycare in these pilot sites to ensure that those who need it most have access, and to ensure that spaces are not going unused. For example, a family who may only need 2 days a week part-time daycare, may they take up a full-time space because it's less expensive for them to pay $10 a day for full-time care than to take a traditional part-time space at a different daycare. Now, is government tracking utilization? This is a concern. Of concern is also that a report was to be issued, I believe last April, that was to look at the actual success of these daycares to see if it makes sense to extend this into a permanent program. But we're still waiting for that document and waiting to see if this is being successful. So how can this government say in this budget that it's going to commit to growing $10 a day daycare if it doesn't have the data to analyze how it's currently being utilized and if it's doing what's intended to be doing? I'd hope also that based on this data that I'm only guessing about, that would be considering looking at a system that is an income-tested model so that we can make sure that we are delivering scarce resources. And as I will demonstrate in a moment, there is not much hope of adding additional capacity and adding additional spaces because of some recent policy changes. So how do we do something that is going to make sure that we're using our scarce resources and targeting support for low and middle income families with dependent children? Government says that affordable daycare will make life easier and will support a strong economic recovery by helping more parents re-enter the workforce. And that it's going to take steps to recognize and retain early childhood educators who we all know have been absolutely essential during this pandemic. But under a recent fee cap imposed on childcare providers, many of those intending to create new spaces or thinking about potential new spaces, even those who have spaces in development, who have signed leases, who have already begun construction on new facilities, I know of thousands of these spaces that have now been put on pause. Now, capping fees sounds like a great idea for parents, and it is. We need to have affordable and accessible daycare. I don't have an issue with capping fees. I have an issue with how it's done, and that has to be reasonable and take into account the needs of both the parents and the daycare providers. But this government is going about it in the wrong way. Pushing those who want to add new daycare spaces or punishing those who want to add new daycare spaces seems counterintuitive if we want to increase the number of spaces available. This government has somehow determined what they're calling market rates for daycare, Mr. Speaker. in certain geographic areas, but they're not forthcoming on what the formula is for them to determine what a market rate is. Regardless, using this largely inaccurate rate, they're telling daycare providers that they can only charge 70% of that rate for any new spaces that they are bringing online. This is regardless of whether your daycare is operating out of a basement or is in a brand new facility paying commercial market rents and offering enriched programming. Same market rate, according to this government. None of that's considered. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's like walking onto a car lot, looking at two cars and expecting the fully loaded Kia with the sunroof and the leather and the custom color. Why isn't that the same price as the baseline Kia with the, not a remote control lock? It's not reality. On January 14th of this year, the childcare professionals of BC wrote to the Minister of State for Childcare and said, quote, "The data you collect and the way it is collected does not compare apples to apples. As such, your geographic fee averages or market rates are at best misleading and at worst nonsensical. We ask you," and this is the childcare professionals of British Columbia, "we ask you to, one, consult with the childcare sector to ensure the data on fee collection is accurate, and two, to create a formula and not use an average and something that calculates current and future fee caps." They say that they have already provided the Minister of State with suggestions of reasonable formulas and would be happy to discuss further, unquote. There has been no engagement from that letter. So why hasn't, if this budget and this throne speech is committed to childcare and committed to helping women get back into the workforce, why hasn't this government demonstrated a willingness to work with daycare providers to come up with solutions that work for both parents and those daycare providers? Does this government not understand how daycares operate? Now, British Columbia tops Canada in the most expensive place to live and to rent commercial property. And there's many very expensive communities in commercial space in British Columbia. So it puts a strain on parents because we have a high cost of living, but it also puts that same pressure and strain on daycare providers. The average daycare provider in British Columbia has a margin of about 2%. Rent and labor are the two biggest expenses. So rather than pushing the cost of daycare down to the providers, why not look at other policy adjustments and be creative? For example, in Ontario, you need 30 square feet per child for capacity in a daycare, and here you need 40. Now that obviously is a cost driver if you're looking at the cost of childcare in Ontario versus the cost of childcare here. When childcare operators are squeezed to cut costs, it reduces their ability to provide tools, supplies to children, purchase needed equipment, and most concerning, it squeezes the wages of ECE workers. And I heard in the speech from the throne that there was a commitment to support and retain ECE workers as they have been invaluable during the pandemic. So the allowable rates now for most daycare providers, if you're opening new spaces, is going to be less than the actual cost to provide those spaces. So for every additional new daycare space in British Columbia, a daycare operator will now lose money. So there is no reality where this actually is going to create more affordable daycare. So what I have witnessed from this government is the poor implementation of flawed programs, which are meant to do one thing and do something completely different. Children in care. Mr. Speaker, I didn't see anything about children in care. Even prior to the pandemic, this government knew that children in care were struggling. Without stable family care, some of these young people move 20 times before they age out of care. Can you imagine what the mental and physical toll that would take on a young person who is just forming, who is just learning about who they are and their sense of self? Now, I would hope that the budget we hear will support implementation of recommendations by the representative for children and youth, including supporting past age 19 a young person in care, including the automatic enrollment of all young people across all types of care and youth agreements in agreements with young adults, which will carry them through until age 27. Government takes on the role of parenting when they bring a young person into care, and parenting does not end on that young person's 19th birthday. We need investment in improving transition planning for youth in care, which should start at least at 14 and carry through and extend till 19. We need to develop a mental health and addiction, substance use services programs specifically for youth in care, transitioning to adulthood. We know that young people from care or young people with involvement with MCFD have a much more difficult time managing this complex and expensive world. There's increased suicide rates, incidences of incarceration, homelessness, addiction, victimization, and more. We need money and programs to break the cycle of destruction in young people's lives. We need to invest in children in care. Investing in children in care is letting them know they matter. The more support that we can provide to youth in care, the more support we provide up front and early, the healthier and more independent they will be as adults. So we are hopeful in this budget we will see support for the implementation of the recommendations of the representative of children and youth. I saw housing in this speech. The government says it will pursue its goal of a province where everybody has access to safe and affordable housing. This is a noble commitment and one we all fully support. Housing is a human right. We need innovative and new ideas about how we think about housing. This budget will include investments through 2021 to help thousands of missing middle rental homes to be built throughout the province. But we heard no mention of the previously committed to $400 renter's rebate or the promise my colleague referenced of the 114,000 new affordable homes. And while vacancy rates have increased only due to the pandemic, rents have also continued to increase. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the House that in 2017, the NDP promised to build 114,000 new rental and co-op homes in 10 years. Government said it would, quote, saturate the housing market with new affordable supply, unquote. Well, I don't think any of us can see that saturation. As of last summer, the provincial government's own numbers show us that just 2,963 of those 114,000 affordable units have been completed. Government will need to go from creating just under 1,000 units per year to creating just under 16,000 units per year for it to meet that highly touted election promise. How do we encourage the private sector to build rental accommodation in British Columbia? I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, how not to do that. And that would be introducing a long-term rental freeze. Unless this government also has the ability to freeze costs, and this appears to be the same tactic that is being taken with daycare providers, freezing what they can charge, but with no ability to freeze what it costs to provide those services. So will the 2021 budget address the gaps in the previous commitment, or is it now making a new commitment to build housing? And will there be money, as recommended by the Representative for Children and Youth, to add additional dedicated housing for youth and young adults leaving care? The representative writes that there is perhaps no greater challenge facing young people transitioning out of care than finding appropriate, affordable, and safe housing. The speech talks about business. The government says it is proud of its 300 biopharmaceutical, medical device, and bioproduct companies, and it should be. But what has this government done to make it attractive for those businesses to want to remain in British Columbia and for money to come into British Columbia for investment? And this is not today because of COVID and the pandemic. This is how are we building British Columbia for the future, and how are we attracting business and investment? World-class healthcare, education, and social supports cannot be advanced without the additional resources derived from private sector growth. And I worry that this government does not understand that. According to the BC Business Council, there are only 700 private companies with 300 or more employees in British Columbia. Small and medium-sized companies make up the greater share of the economy. That means contribution of employment and contribution to GDP, more so than in any other jurisdiction in Canada. And these are the kinds of businesses that have fewer resources to be able to survive and recover from an extraordinary economic event that we have seen. So we need to support both those small and medium-sized businesses with innovative and, can I say, easy to access resources, but we also have to create an environment that is going to attract larger employees and more investment into our province. And to meet both of these, we need progressive tax structures that incentivize growth and attract investment. And this government has layered tax after tax since 2017. It's made British Columbia less affordable and more expensive to do business. There have been 23 new and increased taxes. Vancouver is now the second most unaffordable housing market in the world, making it even less attractive for companies to come here because their employees cannot find housing. Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne was nothing if not light. At the most critical juncture facing the province in generations, we were given platitudes and promises, many recycled from previously unmet conditions. And this commitments, and this is after a 2-month delay from the traditional timing of the presentation of a budget. We need a vision, we need a plan. In crisis, you need leadership that can point the way and help people see what's on the other side, not simply what we hope will be happening next month. And what can be on the other side, Mr. Speaker, if properly planned, is an economically healthy and socially progressive province that can provide safety supports for British Columbians, including safe and affordable food and housing, easily and quickly accessible mental health and addiction support, and a vibrant and innovative business community with the resources to provide a growing number of well-paying jobs and a healthy and sustainable environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.